Today on The Independent, Antonio Morales, USC beat writer for The Athletic, joins Pete and me to preview the Trojans showdown Saturday night against Notre Dame. Plus, Pete and I give our predictions for the game and look at the state of the program through 7 games so far.
Welcome to the latest episode of The Independent. I'm Pete Sampson of The Athletic, joined as always by my co-host Matt Fortuna of The Inside Zone. As a reminder, you can find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever your podcasts. The show is up on YouTube if you'd like to see our lovely faces. Please give us a 5-star review. Subscribe if you're on the YouTube channel. Download, follow the podcasts on Apple, Spotify. It all helps with the visibility of the show and spread the word of The Independent. And Matt, after last weekend, there's, I think, plenty of inquests going around. People want to know what the heck's going on with Notre Dame football. Now that we're, 72 hours removed from the Louisville game, I've gone back and sort of done my rather granular rewatch of it. Felt differently about some things, not about others, but with a little bit of time, you feel any differently about what you saw from Notre Dame Louisville on Saturday and what you heard?
No, it makes less and less sense, to be honest, the further you get away from it. Like in the heat of the moment, oh, they're switching guards. Maybe, I guess someone was hurt, but, maybe there's a more of a sound reason to this. Like I'm always willing to, in the heat of the moment, I'm personally more inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially when they're under the gun and under the pressure of a game situation. But the more and more people we talk to, and the more you look at things in the aftermath of that, and again, I don't know what kind of carryover, if any, this has to the USC game, but like it just makes no sense. I mean, talk to someone on Louisville staff who was just basically like, we completely outcoached them. There's no way around it. And you know what? Jeff Brom had the option to keep Marcus Freeman and Jared Parker when he took over at Purdue, and he chose not to, which should tell you his confidence level, at least in his own staff, related to Notre Dame. So, I hate to point to any one reason for a loss, but I don't know how you can't not look at that and say it was coaching. Like Notre Dame is a better roster than Louisville. Notre Dame has played in bigger games than Louisville, especially this year. Notre Dame has 5 offensive linemen, at least, every one of whom would start tomorrow on Louisville. So whether it's rotating guards, and in Billy Shrout's case, rotating him at 2 different spots, which makes even less sense, rotating centers, very little of it made any sense whatsoever. I thought you had a good kind of post-mortem of it Monday at The Athletic with your final thoughts. Whether it was the 3rd and 13 the timeout before the 3rd and 13 that eventually led to a Louisville makeable field goal that they ended up missing, whether it was Sam Hartman sliding before the first down marker and making a first down sign, all these little things that, you almost forget about in the heat of the moment, and you look back at them with the benefit of the time, and it just makes less and less sense. I have a hard time wrapping my head around that. Our friend Ralph Russo at the AP tweeted later this week, if you're looking for a repeat of TCU last year, it's Louisville. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it has all the ingredients of that. I don't like when I hear that in that context, I'm like, oh wow, like Notre Dame ran to a buzzsaw, but like they didn't. Like
Right.
it's a good football team that played great and took advantage of every opportunity that came its way, most of which were self-inflicted by Notre Dame. I mean, there are people on Louisville staff who could not believe in real time that Notre Dame was rotating centers and rotating the interior of their offensive line. Again, this is stuff that I've never even heard of in Game 7 mid-game. I've heard of playing extra linemen. We saw it in 2017 with I believe it was Hainsey and Kramer at Notre Dame. But again, as people on that staff will tell you, that was because practice was so close and those guys had earned the opportunities. It wasn't like a game day tryout the way it essentially was against Louisville. So a lot of questions about everything moving forward. Again, I don't know if a win or loss over USC fixes everything overnight, but feel a hell of a lot better to go into a bye, having beat your rival. And I'm not in the hot take business, but I don't think it's a stretch to say this is the most important game of Marcus Freeman's tenure when you look at the stakes around it and the potential downside of losing it.
Yeah, it's hard for me to go that far because, like, in some ways, the Cal game was
fair,
pretty important last year. And that came down to a Hail Mary at the end, if you remember, which
But he had a
most people
backup
would choose
quarterback.
not to.
You lose to Cal, it's not as bad as losing to Marshall. It's not a rivalry. Like, just all the elements of this
I
being your
think that,
rival, a night
yeah, I
game.
mean, you could. I think. Well, I wouldn't go like biggest game of the tenure. I do think like the Louisville game is the worst loss.
Oh, yeah.
It's worse than either Ohio State game. It's even worse than Stanford or Marshall. Because of Sam Hartman. I do think like immediately after the game, I don't know why my perception was this way. Not that I thought Sam Hartman played well, but I just thought like the structure around him collapsed. He actually played really bad.
Yeah, that's another takeaway I had with the benefit of in the moment, I didn't blame it all on him, even though he had 5 turnovers, but he did not play well.
No, and that's really it's really 3 weeks in a row where I don't think he played well against Ohio State. He did not play well against Duke. And he was bad against Louisville. But look, if Chris Tyree makes that catch at the goal line, things probably feel a little bit different. I'm not saying Notre Dame would win the game, but they wouldn't. I don't think they would have put themselves in a position to feel like they got played off the field or go for it on 4th and 11. I was like, this is something I'm not a huge analytics person just because I can't say I really understand them. But the decision to kick, I think it was on 4th and 3, where you made a one
Yeah.
score game a one score game opposed to going for it. I didn't say anything about it at the time because I didn't really think about it. I was more into the 4th and 11. Like, why would you do that? Because you're making a 2-score game a 2-score game. Like, what did you? The game management of it. Did you have any thoughts on that? As like we get farther away from the
No,
actual.
it's funny. I assume this is why you bring it up. I saw a graph going around. I forget which Twitter account it was, but it was some football analytics site that basically said the math said you should have gone for it instead of kicking that 54-yard field goal. Again, I'm not going to argue with the math. I didn't second guess it in real time. I don't second guess it now. And I still I know everyone, you among them, has been killing them for going on 4th and 11. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I had no problem with it. I mean, the game at that point, you needed a miracle to come. Like, there was the difference between this Notre Dame game and this game between any game of the Marcus Freeman era was the minute they fell behind in the second half. At no point did I feel any confidence whatsoever, based on what I had seen to that point,
Mm.
that Notre Dame was going to come back and win it. Like, they did nothing to show you that they were worthy of that faith. And sure, you could say, well, why would they get a 4th and 11? Well, again, the defense played well enough where they held them to a field goal and kept it a 2-score game. And while the odds are stacked against them, going 4th and 11, the odds are stacked against them really doing anything offensively that game. Like, I don't know. I'm not making analytical sense of it, but in the heat of the moment, and even in hindsight, I don't. I mean, I'm not saying it's the greatest call in the world. Nothing was working for them offensively Saturday, but I'm not going to sit here and criticize it, because I don't know what else they were supposed to do. If they punted it, Louisville would have held the ball for much longer, and it would have just gotten to be a more dire situation.
Yeah, it's I think it's what it certainly didn't decide the game. It felt much weirder in real time
Oh,
than
it
it
felt
did.
desperate, but they were
Yeah,
desperate.
because it was. I didn't like it in real time because the receivers had made no plays the entire game. I mean, Notre Dame has not had a scholarship wide receiver make a 3rd or 4th down conversion since Rico Flores in the 3rd quarter against Ohio State. Like, that is not good.
No,
And if it's 4th and 11, what do you need? You need a receiver to make a play. Notre Dame's receivers have not made any.
no. I mean, again, you're right. I don't. If you want to extrapolate that in the big picture, all right. Well, why are we even showing up for the fourth quarter? We're clearly not going to do anything here because we haven't done anything the last 3 weeks. So,
Yeah.
the other disappointing part, with the benefit of hindsight, and again, this is like nitty gritty, but in the context of the game, I think it makes sense. Like, Jordan Faison, 3rd down catch, touchdown. I'm not sure I even noticed him on the field for stretches of the second half. And is that, hey, he's a walk on who isn't used enough and doesn't know everything in the offense, in which case everyone could have seen this receiver problem coming. Maybe not to this extent, but you always got to prepare for the worst case scenario. The lack of involvement with him, and I can't believe I'm saying this about a guy who literally not played a snap at a football game before Saturday, was a little disappointing in light of what he showed in the first half.
Yeah, he did play in the second half, but had no. I don't. He had sort of like a half target in the fourth quarter. It that was really one of the few things I thought that Jared Parker did a good job of, is like figuring out how to like isolate the slot receiver against Louisville safety. Those were really the only times where you saw Notre Dame's receivers running away and creating separation from Louisville's DBs when they got a slot matched up against a safety. But that was sort of all that they did. This there, and it's like even I think it was the Blake Fisher face mask penalty that wiped out I think a 30-yard Mitchell Evans gain. Like, I don't think Notre Dame was playing so poorly. I don't think any of this changes the outcome of the game. It just maybe it would make it feel a little bit different, but like we're not living in a vibes check world here with Notre Dame football. Like you have to actually win the game. Like just losing it competitively to Louisville is not all that admirable, considering where this program felt like it was just third quarter against Ohio State. We were like, okay, they're actually going to do it. It is really fallen apart since then, and like we're recording this on a Tuesday morning. I will talk to the coaches on Tuesday night, including Jared Parker. But I thought Marcus Freeman's comments on Monday, he didn't want to get into play calling. He said he had no problem with the play calling. He has a problem with the execution, which like coaches always say that. But I sort of approached that question from a different angle when I asked him about like, what do you do well offensively? Like, who are you? Because I think one of Parker's tenets has been they're going to be versatile, they're going to be multiple, and they, from a personnel point of view, they do a ton of stuff. I mean, we saw a 4 tight end set that was a pass play. They run 2 back. They have some wildcat in there. Like they do a lot of different formational things, but I think that's led to these execution problems where guys don't know who to block because they don't have time to practice it because they are doing so many damn things. So it's that's what I'm most interested to sort of hear from Parker about. Like everyone wants to blame like play calling, like if there's, as if he looks at his sheet and there's like plays on there that would have worked that he's not calling. That may be true, but I think the issue to me is like there's probably too many plays on the sheet to begin with. Just focus on what you do well, figure that out, and then lean much harder into that than you have the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think there's probably some truth to that. Marcus Freeman was getting killed, at least on social media, for his comments defending the play calling. Again, I don't know what you expect him to say at that point. He's not going to throw anyone under the bus, but it's definitely opened them to a lot of questions right now. I mean, like to your follow up, what is your identity right now, right? Like you're not playing like you're the offensive line, defensive line driven program that you've kind of hung your hat on and that you looked like for the first, was it, how to say, 4 or 5 games of the year. You kind of lost yourself in that regard. Audric Estime, where art thou? Like they lined him up split wide on third down, which I could tell you drew a lot of laughs from people on the defensive side of Louisville because he's not a threat to catch the ball in that situation. You don't turn him in short yardage situations. Now with the offensive line playing as poorly as it did, I don't know what your options are, but it just it reeked of jack of all trades, master of none.
Yes.
Just trying to do too much and not really being able to be good at any one thing. I mean, there's no one outside of, I guess, Jordan Faison who you look at that night and say, on that side of the ball, played well. Mitchell Evans, when he got open,
Mitchell
was able to
Evans
make
played
some play.
well.
He played well, but even Louisville did a good job of taking him out of the game relative to what he'd been doing the previous couple of games. So just a disappointing performance on all fronts. You wrote a couple stories on this. I wrote a story on the Inside Zone, just like, who do you blame for this, right? Is it the play calling? Yes, something. Is it the schedule? Sure, some. Is it the office coordinator himself? Well, yeah, probably some when you go back and look at the search that landed him there. But I do think, and we get into this with Antonio Morales, our guest, later on in this episode. As much as we're criticizing Notre Dame's schedule, and I'm saying they do deserve criticism for it, I'd love to know what USC was thinking, where they also had a week 0 game. They had an early season bye, but it was week 3, maybe. It was early. I think it was week 3 or week 4. They're now in the middle of a stretch of 9 games in 9 weeks, and their competition level is, now that they're started with Notre Dame, elite. I mean, they go from Notre Dame to Utah. They've got Washington, Oregon, and UCLA still. Their second bye is the last weekend of the regular season, which is only a bye if you make the Pac-12 championship game, which they might not with that schedule. So, 9 games in 9 weeks with that schedule and that defense is borderline criminal. It's a worse situation than the one Notre Dame finds itself in right now, although Notre Dame doesn't seem to know how to manage it. It's interesting, right? I mean, there's so many weird dynamics about this game. It's a rivalry game between 2 second-year coaches. Fox is sending their pregame show to a game they don't have. NBC is sending essentially their B team to a game we all thought would command their A team. And I don't know if either fan base is, well, Notre Dame's clearly isn't with good reason, but USC undefeated in name only, if that makes sense. Like, there's no one around USC football right now who's rah-rah and gung-ho about anything
Yeah, I mean, I feel like their
other than Caleb
undefeated
Williams' Heisman.
their undefeated record probably has even less of a convincing factor than Louisville's last week. Like,
Yeah. I
they
think
just
they're
have a better
98th.
brand.
I think they're 98th. Well, because they did it last year, at least, made a New Year's Six game last year. Like, there's the credibility. They have the Heisman winner. Like, you know what they're capable of.
Yeah.
Louisville, you didn't know what they were capable of. And I'm not sure Louisville knew what they were capable of before Saturday night.
No, I don't think that they did.
But I don't think there are a whole lot of happy campers in USC side right now. Again, they come out and blow out Notre Dame. Maybe that changes, but they're going to have to get up and do that again and again and again. And even if they lose to Notre Dame, not that that's not a significant loss or a significant win in the case of Notre Dame, it has zero bearing on the Pac-12 race, which will command most of USC's attention down the stretch here. One other thing, this happened, I believe, after we recorded Saturday, but it struck a nerve relative to other conversations we've had on the show this year. Did you see the end of regulation with USC Arizona?
I did. And that is a reminder, 1,072,035 to not
play
put the game on the leg of a kicker when a guy can just run it in the end zone. There are so many instances where Marcus Freeman makes a decision that backfires, and it's not like we've all seen like decisions that seem right and they go wrong, but I feel like there's a lot of decisions that seem wrong that are wrong, and that's a concern right now if you're Notre Dame.
Yeah, I didn't think we'd be bringing that one up again, but USC proved to be a perfect example of why you don't do that. And the play calling before that was even worse, throwing it and then having Caleb Williams stance a little bit back there. We'll see. Looking forward to a game. Should be a big game. With that, we will bring in our guest, Athletic USC beat writer, Antonio Morales.
One of the best parts of starting the Independent podcast was a chance to pick the brands we wanted to work with, and Roback was at the top of my list. As the owner of multiple polos, hoodies, Q-zips, and shorts, I can tell you the quality, fit, and feel is unmatched. You've probably seen Roback on Audric Estime, Kyle Hamilton, and Michael Mayer. Or maybe you saw the dozen Notre Dame fans wearing the Shamrock polo at the Central Michigan game last weekend. I can tell you I saw Roback gear in Dublin earlier this year. While the gear hasn't made me quite that athletic as those Notre Dame football players, Roback is my go-to on the golf course, heading to the lake, watching my kids' sports, or just walking the dog. So make sure you're comfortable throughout the season with Roback. Use code IRISH for 20% off your first purchase. That's code IRISH for 20% off all hoodies, polos, Q-zips, and more.
Hey, Matt, the weather has started to turn and USC is coming to town here at Notre Dame. So you know what that means.
I sure do, Pete. You can gear up for the big Irish game this weekend with Home Field Apparel. They make some of the best products in the world. They dig through the archives and history of the Irish to find unique logos, mascots, and moments to make thoughtful designs for Notre Dame fans. I have a Notre Dame tennis pullover. I have a Notre Dame women's basketball t-shirt. The Clash More Mike t-shirt is absolutely a fan favorite. And the good news for a listener of this show is that first-time customers can get 10% off their first order using code Independent23 at checkout. That's on all Notre Dame apparel at homefieldapparel.com. 10% off your first order using code Independent23 at checkout.
Matt,
What have you always said is my biggest weakness on fall Saturdays?
Well, Pete, I'd say your hair, but who am I to talk? Let's go with your wardrobe.
Harsh but fair.
ESQ outfits over 400 professional athletes, celebrities, and Irish players on game day, with bespoke clothing that elevates their game off the field. ESQ sculpts every garment with precision, helping you look your best for work, weddings, celebrations, or in your case, Pete, the press box.
Listeners of The Independent can get 15% off their first online order by using the code IND15 at checkout. That's IND15, or visit them at their Chicago showroom for a full custom look. Head to esqclothing.com to create your perfect fit. All right, pleased to welcome to The Independent a colleague of mine at The Athletic, Antonio Morales, who covers USC for us. And Antonio, the tone around this game, I think, took a turn from Notre Dame's point of view last weekend. It almost took a pretty sharp turn from USC's as well. And so I was curious, just sort of the vibe on USC first before talking like personnel. Like, how good do you think USC is after the two Arizona games?
I thought coming into the year, this was around a 10-2 team. I thought Notre Dame. I've always thought Notre Dame was going to be a loss. I just thought the schedule was too hard for the team, especially the second half of the year. And you have Notre Dame, Utah, Oregon, Washington, and UCLA. I still had questions about the defense, but I thought the defense was going to be a little better than what it's been. I think you have Arizona where they give up 28 points, Colorado they give up 41, then Arizona they give up 41, they fall behind 17-0. So I think the anxiety among the fan base has kind of turned up a notch, obviously, the past 3 weeks. I think it's kind of intensified a bit each week. That Arizona State game, I think they were a 34-point favorite, and there was a 7-point game in the fourth quarter. Colorado, finished the game on a 20-0 scoring run after they're losing by 27. Then obviously we saw Arizona took 3 overtimes on Saturday night. So I think the fans are kind of coming to grips with, this might not be a Pac-12 title team, or this might not be a playoff team like people expected prior to the season.
It's funny you mentioned the schedule, Antonio, because Notre Dame and USC both played week 0 games this year. Notre Dame is yet to have a bye, and they're taking some flack for that right now, playing 8 straight. USC had an early bye. They play 9 in a row against much tougher opponents, as you just mentioned, and they have a bye essentially in the last weekend of the regular season. So if they're in the Pac-12 title game, that might mean something. If they're not, it's kind of worthless. Mm-hmm. How are they navigating this stretch? And, how are they looking at this last year in the Pac-12, where it looks like there are 4 or 5 different teams that have a legitimate shot to make the playoff this year?
USC would never say this, and Lincoln Riley would probably never admit to it. But they kind of did something they did similar to last year. Last year around this time, they were 6-0, and they played Utah, and that was the biggest game, the biggest test by far of their season. Utah was a 2-loss team trying to save their season. It kind of reminds me of this Notre Dame week, and USC got really banged up in that game, and their next 3 games after that were Arizona, which was bad last year, Cal, and Colorado before they played UCLA and Notre Dame to end the year. And so they had guys banged up, and they just didn't really play them those 3 games because they thought they could manage that part of the schedule and get through it without them, and they did. And so you see this season, the schedule's easier on the front end, and so there's guys who are key contributors or starters who haven't played, who didn't play the first couple of weeks, or sat out because they could beat Stanford without one of their linebackers or something, or one of their DBs or one of their receivers. So you've seen that the past couple of weeks, and to kind of where they're maybe being precautious with guys because they know the second half of the year is so loaded. And I think one of the guys I'm curious is to see his status this week is Zachariah Branch, just because they've sat him out the past 2 games, and going into both games of that, okay, they don't need him to win. But Arizona, they probably did need him because the receivers weren't getting open. So I think that'll be an interesting one to watch this week just because he changes the whole dynamic of the receiver room. But that's kind of the stuff you see is kind of them being precautious with guys and having them sit out. Some of the more winnable games, but they can't really afford to do that these next 6 weeks.
In what ways is Caleb Williams different, better from the guy who won the Heisman Trophy last year? Because I think that in a lot of ways, like it felt like he kind of won it against Notre Dame. That was like sort of a great closing argument for him. But how is he any different than the guy who was elite last year?
I think it's just more of the same stuff, but just kind of, elevated to another level. Notre Dame, the fans and you guys saw last year is the playmaking ability, the playmaking to extend the play and with his legs and buy time for his receivers. And obviously, I think the play he did win the Heisman was that run where he evaded all those sacks and cut across the middle and did all that stuff. It's been a lot of that improv this year. I think he's taken it to another level. I think that's been a big difference. He hasn't run as much this year. There's times where he has an open lane and you're like, okay, if you just take off here, you're going to get 15 yards on the first down. But he's really just been patient and found the open receiver this year. And even on Saturday night, he was like, I don't like to run the football. And you've been seeing that just a lot more this year, is that ability to extend the play, improv, and do all that stuff. The interesting thing was on Saturday, it was Arizona. I think they played 7 DBs and played man coverage, and the USC receivers weren't getting open. So he was scrambling around, and the big plays weren't there like we've seen them the first 5 weeks. And I think that'll be interesting to watch. And so on Saturday, it was probably one of his worst games as USC starting quarterback, and he still kind of willed them to victory. I think this challenge is going to be interesting for him just because so many things around him are struggling right now.
It's Jared Parker versus Alex Grinch this week, and I'm sure both fan bases love to have their own venting session on a podcast and say who's under more fire right now. I'd actually say Alex Grinch is, and I think you'd probably agree with me, Antonio. What is it about this defense that, I mean, they weren't good last year. They really struggled down the stretch. I was willing to give them a pass. I didn't think there was a whole lot of talent on that side of the ball. Year 2, no excuses. They are number 1 in tackles for loss, which against this offensive line could come in handy. But what exactly do they do well, and why hasn't anything else been working for them?
Oh, they really upgraded the talent level in the transfer portal and the defensive front this offseason. I think that's been clear. Bear Alexander's really disruptive on the interior of the defensive line. And the stat sheet doesn't show it, but he's a force. Jameel Muhammad, who's a former Vanderbilt quarterback who turned defensive end, went to Georgia State, transferred to USC. I think he's got 6 sacks this season and I think 10 tackles for loss. So he's up there, and he's kind of been one of the guys who sparked their ranking. I think they're number 3 or it's like near top 5 in sacks, and I think they're near the top 5 in tackles for loss, like you said. And so they do that well. They get pressure and they kind of cause havoc well. It's kind of like last year where like the defense wasn't good, but they had like one calling card, and last year was turnovers. This year it's sacks and just disruption up front. But everything else is kind of rough. The run defense isn't good. And I think that's different from last year because you saw last year they held up well against Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
They held up well against a lot of teams. I think people just got misconstrued by the end of the season because the end of the season was so bad. But the run defense was kind of fine up until the Pac-12 title game in the Cotton Bowl. This year it just hasn't been good. I think teams have been exploiting them on the edges. Toss pitch has been like a first down, an automatic first down until Arizona ran it in triple overtime. That's been like an automatic first down. And the secondary has been a real issue. I think a lot of people coming into the year had the expectation that the run defense was going to be the weakness, but it's been the secondary. And I think they were down to their 4th or 5th corner on Saturday night because of injury. So that'll be worth monitoring the health of the secondary and stuff. Just because it's a group that struggled already. I know Notre Dame has issues at receiver, but um, the secondary has been exploited by San Jose State and Nevada. So we'll see how they match up with Notre Dame.
Have they? I was interested to sort of get a little bit more into like the guys that they've held back a little bit. I mean, Corey Foreman hasn't played a ton, and what just a personnel update heading into this week. You mentioned they're banged up in the secondary. Like how many guys are they down at this point? How much of a, I guess, best first 11 on both sides of the ball are they going to be able to put out there on Saturday night?
I think Damani Jackson would probably be. He sat out the Arizona game. I think he got banged up, or he might have gotten a concussion like against Colorado. And he was struggling against Colorado. So I think he's going to be the one that's probably maybe most ready to come back this week. Obviously, that's a starter at corner. Jacoby Covington didn't finish the game. He was a starter last week, but he talked to the media afterwards. So I think maybe that's a sign he'll be ready to go this week. So those are two guys. And Christian Roland Wallace, transfer from Arizona, who was a starter too. He didn't finish the game as well, but I don't know if he's going to be ready to come back like the other two are. So they had to play Prophet Brown and Sierra Wright in overtime, and Arizona took advantage. I think they threw out Prophet Brown on the very first play of overtime, and Jacob Cowing scored a touchdown. So those guys, the offensive line, Justin Dedich was a little hobbled in overtime. He was limping around, but he finished the game. So that's a group kind of worth watching as well, just because the group has struggled. And obviously Zachariah Branch, he's such a dynamic player and so electric, and especially in the return game too. So I think personnel-wise, those are the guys to watch headed into this game, and I think most of the focus is on the secondary.
The forecast isn't great, especially if you're coming from the West Coast. And this is something USC, I guess, will have to get used to in their future life in the Big Ten. How ready is this team to play a different style of football if that's what it takes to win Saturday?
Yeah, they haven't really had an elements game under Lincoln Riley. And like you said yesterday that it was a rainier year than usual in Southern California. It's like, yeah, but how much are you really practicing in full pads and all that stuff? So I'm really curious to see how they'll handle the rain. I think that would obviously lend people to think you'd run the ball more, but Lincoln hasn't really stuck with the run a lot. I think that's been a big frustration with the USC fan base. He's kind of been impatient with the run throughout the course of the year. So, and the offensive line has struggled. They weren't really opening holes or getting push against Arizona, and this is expected to be like a really good unit this year, and they've had struggles. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to affect the offense and Caleb Williams if they can't throw the ball because of the weather. I know they'll try, and I know they'll have some success, but I mean, I think it could slow down the efficiency of the passing game if the rain is coming down hard. But Marshawn Lloyd, the running back, has had a really good season. I think he's third in the country in yards per carry, and he's really explosive. We just I feel like with the offensive line struggles, it's kind of hit or miss. So there'll be like a 27-yard run and then maybe like a 2-yard run or a loss. So
sounds familiar.
So if they'll have to figure out their run game for the weather and just because they need more balance offensively.
If Zachariah Branch can go, and what was the injury that has sort of held him back? Like how in the sort of realm of dynamic UFC playmakers, like it's an elite group over sort of the last 20 years or so. But like, where do you think he could fit in? Because like, I mean, watching some of it, especially his returns and special teams are, I don't want to go back to number 5, but like it's pretty impressive to watch.
Yeah. I think it's something in the lower body. It's been undisclosed, but he warmed up against Colorado. So I was like, oh, maybe he will play. And then all of a sudden he just wasn't able to. So I wonder if it's like something in the lower body. But I think obviously with him, the return game, just like I've covered this is like my 6th season covering USC now. So I think I barely missed Adoree Jackson I think it's probably like
Mm.
the most comparable, or one of the most comparable to Zach. Just and USC's had good receivers. You guys have seen them: Drake London, Michael Pittman, those guys. But nobody who's like the crowd just like holds their breath every time he like touches the ball, and to hear the Coliseum just kind of like continue to like the roar continue to kind of like escalate as he's getting more yardage, and like it's apparent he's going to score a touchdown like on a return. That's just something you haven't seen in a while at USC. And I know fans have been like, well, this is what it would have been like if USC got Deshaun Jackson like 16 years ago or whatever, when they missed out on him. But yeah, just the ability for him to just like maintain like top level speed while cutting is like a unique trait you don't really see very often. He's just so fluid and such a gifted athlete and gifted runner, and his vision's really underrated too. It just gives them something they really haven't had in years. Obviously, like you said, 5 and Reggie. I think pure offensive player, he's probably the only player they've had like that since Reggie. Joe McKnight was there, but I don't think Joe McKnight was this explosive, this fast. And Adore played defense. So I think you're talking about full-time offensive players. I think it's, since Reggie, they've had somebody this dynamic and this impactful in the game.
Tonio, Caleb Williams is a betting favorite right now to win the Heisman again. How realistic do you think that is? I mean, I get why he is right now. They're undefeated. But when you look at the schedule, you assume it's going to catch up to him. And you assume if you're going to win it twice in a row, you're going to have to do something even better than you did last year. Do you think it's a real possibility he could do it again?
I think it'll be real as long as they're like 10-2. If they win double-digit games, I can see it being like a real possibility. If it's like 9-3, I don't know. I think last year he scored 52 touchdowns in 14 games, and this year he's on pace for 56 and 12. So he's like kind of taking it up another notch. And so I think it's a realistic possibility as long as they're kind of like in that New Year's Six hunt, 10 wins, stuff like that. But if it's like 9-3, I just don't see how he'd beat out like say Michael Penix is on the verge of the playoff, or Dylan Gabriel or something, or Jordan Travis or whatever. Like I just think that's a difficult spot for him. But I think if they're 10 wins or near 6 bound or something, then I think it becomes more real.
I'm curious of your sense of like how good USC actually is based on the schedule that they played so far. Because I mean, like Notre Dame ran into this last week. Louisville, you're like, are they good? I don't know. I mean, they struggled with NC State, and Notre Dame they got blown off the line of scrimmage. What, like, do you get a sense of like, is USC like really, really good? I mean, I know you predicted 10-2 before the year, and it sounds like it still feels that way. But if you're sitting here at undefeated in mid-October, means you've got a 4-2 finish around the corner. I mean, just to get a sense of like how good they actually are.
Yeah, it's like people I think the doubts have increased. Like I said, more and more over the past 3 weeks, just because this was the soft part of the schedule. Everybody expected them to be 6-0 at this point, and it's not. I think it's kind of similar to last year, to where like everyone thought, okay, the first 6 games are winnable, and then Utah would be like that major test in the 7th game. But they had Oregon State last year, and it turned out Oregon State was really good and a 10-win team, and Fresno State won the Mountain West. So they played teams that were like good in like throughout the course of the season. So I think this year there hasn't been a team like Oregon State on the schedule who's like, okay, they're going to win 10 games, or a team that's going to win the Mountain West. San Jose State's 1-5 right now. So there hasn't been like, okay, there's this team that's actually like good. It's been, we'll see what Colorado does. But I think, Travis Hunter and Shiloh Sanders didn't even play that game. So that wasn't like full strength Colorado. And I do think some of USC's struggles have been, they haven't said this or anything, but I honestly think like there's been like no opponent that's really like kind of commanded their focus, like 100% focus and respect. I think Notre Dame will. I think that'll be the first time all season an opponent will, just because they've been like 3 touchdown favorites in all these games, and now they're going to be an underdog. So I think Notre Dame will certainly have their attention, and I think they're 6-0, but they've dropped in the polls all 3 weeks after their 3 wins. I think the fan base thinks, well, like Florida State had a bad game with Boston College, and you don't see them get punished as much. Or Washington squeaked out a win against Arizona. It was 31-24. Like all these teams have bad games. Why is USC getting punished? I mean, it's just like 3 weeks in a row of surviving and barely holding on. That gives people doubts.
If USC wins this weekend, what will they do? What will they have to take away from Notre Dame to come away with technically the upset?
Caleb Williams will have to go off. Again, the offensive line will have to be better protecting him. They haven't faced the front as talented, probably as our defense as talented as Notre Dame's. And Arizona gave them a lot of issues and put a lot of stuff on film for other teams to take, and how to slow this offense down. So I think they'll have to kind of correct those mistakes and have a little bit more balance. The receivers will have to be better in getting open and finding some lanes that they didn't last week. And I think the defense will probably have to play a similar game to what it did last year against Notre Dame, to where obviously Drew Pine was kind of like he didn't miss a throw until the 4th quarter of the game, which is really interesting. But I mean, there's a lot of like Michael Mayer who was hurting him. So just kind of limit the receivers and kind of hold up well against the run game. I think would have to kind of be the recipe on defense, and force a turnover too. I think that's kind of the formula if USC is going to walk out with a win.
So I guess we wrap up for me on this. Like, I know you before the season, you felt like this was going to be a loss for USC. Does that sentiment still hold for you going into Saturday? I guess how do you see this game playing out?
Yeah, I still think it's a loss. USC just has a lot of bad habits, and like I know they haven't been playing good teams, and I'm like, hey, maybe they flip a switch. But to me, like the habits you show over 6 weeks, it's kind of hard not to say, that's who you are. And they just lose focus a lot of times defensively, and the offense has more issues than it did last year. I think last year we saw the offensive line just kind of dominate Notre Dame, particularly in the run game. The past game, I think Notre Dame got probably more pressure on Caleb last year than any other team. But the run game, the offensive line really held up well and kind of won the game for USC. I don't know if they're capable of that this year. And it's a road environment, and USC struggled on the road this season. There's always, like, especially the first game against Arizona State, there was so many breakdowns in terms of clock management and execution and things like that. The offensive line's been kind of prone to penalties too. And this is a much different environment than Arizona State, even though Colorado was a good crowd, but this is just a much different environment. And Notre Dame's desperate, and they're coming in with kind of their season on the line, back against the wall in terms of just kind of trying to keep this thing afloat. And like I said, it kind of reminds me of Utah last year, to where they were a 2-loss team, and they kind of needed a win just to keep their Pac-12 title hopes alive. And USC was game, and they were up 14 points in that game, but the defense struggled in the second half and gave up a touchdown on like every drive. And USC lost by 1. And so I still think it's a loss. I know Notre Dame hasn't done well offensively, but I still think a lot of teams have had success against this defense. And San Jose State, the only teams that really haven't are San Jose or Nevada and Stanford. Those are 2 of the worst teams in FBS. So I think any kind of functional. I know Notre Dame fans probably might say offense hasn't been functional the past couple of weeks, but Drew Pine had success against this offense, and I expect Sam Hartman will too.
Awesome. Well, Antonio, thanks for joining us. You guys can follow his work at The Athletic, and we'll look for you in the press box Saturday night. Safe travels, buddy.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Hartman's in the shotgun. 3 pass catchers to his right. Drops back. He looks that way. Looking middle. Plenty of time. Floats it down inside the 5. Touchdown, Notre Dame! Jordan Faison. His second catch of his career. Good for 6. 36-yard touchdown. Hartman to Faison. Plummer throws to the far sideline. Complete. 35. Ball spinning out. Yes! Fumbled the ball on the 38-yard line. Notre Dame has it. Cam Hart knocked the ball away from Jamari Thrash after he caught it and recovered the ball himself.
That was Antonio Morales of The Athletic. We thank him for sharing his USC expertise. We thought things were dark in South Bend with the 5-2 start. 6-0 ain't a picnic, it sounds like, in Southern California.
I was going to ask, like, do you think the right team's favored? And I think Antonio would say, yes, the right team is favored.
I didn't ask it because he kind of told.
Yeah, and it's like if you are on Notre Dame Twitter or Notre Dame message boards, you would think that Notre Dame's going to lose by 13 points on Saturday night, which, I mean,
they might.
This is one of those games where really anything is in bounds. Like, could Notre Dame run USC off the field like 2017? I could see that happening. Could Notre Dame get run off the field? I could see that happening as well. Like, rarely do I think we go into Notre Dame's games with like this big of a variance of potential outcomes. Like, usually it's like, well, I could see A, B, or maybe C. Now it's like I could see the whole damn alphabet happening on Saturday night.
Yeah, Notre Dame's like Notre Dame fans are living like fans of most college football teams have for most of their lifetimes, right? Like, part of the beauty of the sport is it's so damn unpredictable. Crazy stuff that makes no sense whatsoever happens every Saturday. Looking at you, Miami. And with Brian Kelly, like, they were a boring, predictable team. And that's, I get why that can be boring and you could want something a little bit livelier and more exciting.
Who wants to win 30 games in a row against the ACC?
But no, I'm with you on this game. Like, I don't think like that 2017 game was such, and I'll remember that as a game where like it was pretty much the perfect Notre Dame game, right? Like, rivalry game, resurrected season, night game, great atmosphere. That was a USC team that ended up winning the Pac-12 that year.
Yeah, that was the Sam Darnold team, right?
Yeah, top 5 pick at quarterback. You didn't know how good Notre Dame was. And that was, I think, 49-14, and it really could have been worse. Like, that was a name your score. We're just going to run it down your throat all night, try to stop us kind of game. Clemson wasn't that dominant, but it was very dominant. And it was even more surprising given the way both teams had played to that point. And I bring those two games up to show that there is a possibility of them pleasantly surprising us all on Saturday night. And I think when you throw in the fact that USC was damn near a playoff team last year, they're undefeated this year. They have the best college football player I've seen with my own 2 eyes since Deshaun Watson, maybe, probably even better than him. Better than him. Watson had a lot more weapons. Johnny Football, how far back do you have to go? That just adds a layer of possibility, because I think when you have a guy as good as Caleb Williams, and who can beat you in as many different ways as Caleb Williams, USC's never going to be out of it. Whereas I don't know if this Notre Dame team's built to come back from, say, a 2-touchdown deficit. I would not count out USC. I mean, they just came back from a 17-0 deficit, and Caleb statistically did not play a great game. But if you watch that game, I mean, some of the plays he was able to make, especially what ended up being the game-winning 2-point conversion. I'm watching that live thinking, all right, he stepped out of bounds because that's not possible.
Oh, yeah.
And then you zoom in and you're like, no, he got in. And not only that, I mean, the formation they lined up in, where literally everyone goes left and they just let Caleb work his magic on the right. Very, very impressive. And you've seen some of the throws, the Colorado game in particular, where he just looks left for dead and he's able to make stuff happen off his back foot. I mean, even the incomplete throw on the 2-point attempts and I think double overtime was just maybe the best throw he made all night, even though it was an incomplete pass. Like, he is that good. Notre Dame saw that firsthand last year. And because of him, like, there's just this never kind of, you're never safe kind of feeling. That said, Vegas is usually right about these things, especially when they look funny. And this one looks funny if you've seen both these teams play so far. I
They're
mean,
begging you to take USC.
they
Begging.
are, and that's usually a shaky proposition. Chris Felica, now the Bear, now at Fox, gambling maven, had a stat he tweeted this week. Where is it? Dating back to 2015, there have been 14 pre-bowl instances of a team 6-0 or better being an underdog versus a 2-loss team. 11 of those teams lost outright, including USC last year at Utah, when the 6-0 Trojans lost 43-42 as a 3.5-point underdog to the 4-2 Utes.
Which
In that
Antonio even
game-
referenced.
Yes. So I'm letting you go first. Like, I've gone back and forth all week on this one. And it's you said it. None of it's going to make sense. What we say, what happens. I'll say this. The over-under is 62.5. And I don't say this just because of the weather, which does not look particularly promising right now. I'm going under again because I don't see this being a shootout. And again, I could be wrong there.
But yeah, I think it will be under as well, which actually works in Notre Dame's favor. I think I'm going to pick Notre Dame to win. Go 27-24, maybe 30-20. They'll go 30-27. 30-27 Notre Dame. But I don't think it's going to be predictive of anything the rest of the season. I don't think it's going to be a statement. I don't like it. It's just going to feel random. I think this season, unfortunately, is taking on like kind of a random feel to it, where you just don't know what they're going to be week in and week out. And it puts stuff in play that shouldn't be. I realize Wake Forest, Pittsburgh, and Stanford are bad, but the way Notre Dame's playing football right now, it's kind of hard to feel super confident about what's coming down the pipe. So I'll go Notre Dame 30-27, but I don't think anything's going to feel solved or fixed, or the ship's going to be righted, or a statement is going to be made. I just think one football team is going to be better than another football team on one game at home in not great conditions. And so I'll go, Notre Dame 30-27, but who knows what we're going to see. This is totally up for grabs.
Totally up for grabs. Makes it exciting. My faith and confidence in them has never been lower, maybe throughout this era, coming out of last week. And that makes it like I saw some future lines last week before the Louisville game that had Notre Dame as favorite. I thought, that's interesting. Notre Dame loses. I'm thinking, well, that'll be fixed. It's not. Notre Dame's still favored. And there is a good reason for that. And we laid out some of those reasons. I don't trust them to keep up with Caleb Williams in the offense. I don't trust them to mount a comeback if they find themselves down and out. But if they get back to, and I picked them to win every game this year, and I've looked like an idiot in 2 of them. So I don't like looking like an idiot a third time. That being said, if they can just, I don't want to say simplify, but get back to their roots and become that offensive line, defense line driven program that they looked like through 5 games, and have kind of hung their hat on as a program, especially under this regime. And that's easier said than done, right? I don't think you snap a finger, stick with the same starting 5 that you did the previous 6 games and everything's fixed. But I do think that's where Notre Dame wins this game. And look, defensively, they've done it all year long. I might have been even more impressed with the defense with the benefit of time against Louisville than I was in real time. Because again, they had no chance whatsoever. They gave up 2 big plays to a really good running back, both of which came when they were basically tapped out and just put in too disadvantageous of a position. I'm rambling here. I realize that. I'll go Notre Dame 31, USC 24. I don't feel good about it. I wouldn't feel good about it the other way. Vegas knows I'm not going to poke the bear in that regard. USC is begging to get got, much the same way Clemson was begging to get got last year when they came in undefeated. I think Notre Dame matches up better with this USC team than they did with that Clemson team last year, at least going into the game. So I'll say Notre Dame, I think, is going to control this game. I think Caleb will do enough to keep this a 4-quarter game, to keep it interesting, and to maybe even give USC a chance to win when trailing at the end. But it's a team sport. I think USC's defense is just not good at all. And I don't know how many times you could have one single man on a football field bail you out. I said all year USC is going to lose at least 2 games this year. That was independent of this game. So I guess you could say they're going to lose 3 games this year, because even UCLA is the best defense in the country right now, by the way, which, considering they made a coordinator change after last year and USC didn't, I think is pretty poetic and telling as well. I got Notre Dame 31, USC 24. I believe that's the same score I had for Ohio State, both of which are under. But yeah, that's my story, and I guess I'm sticking to it.
All right. Well, we will be back late Saturday night, early Sunday morning with a post-game episode of The Independent. I think we're going to try to go live together.
We'll
see how it works.
Those live shows really depend, like, as far as numbers, they really depend on how the game goes and the mood everyone's in. And
right.
Again, there is a wide spectrum of possibilities with this one.
Yes.
Because again, I said at the outset of this show, I think this is the most crucial game of the Marcus Freeman era, because if they lose this game, and I don't care how they lose it, although if they lose it going away, it'll be worse. 4-3 entering the bye week, all your goals are gone. If you lose, I assume Sam Hartman didn't play well. That adds another layer of, all right, where did all the excitement for the season go? It'll be as not dark, but as kind of uninspiring a second half of a season as I can remember, if they lose this game and go into the bye at 4-3.
Yeah, it would feel like some of the seasons that I covered early in my time on the beat, when like it was Davey or Weiss, where just like it was mid-October and you're just like, well, that was fun. It just the difference for this one would be like the volatility from how things felt going into Ohio State to like the doldrums of what this would feel like post USC if Notre Dame's 4-3. That would be just like a whiplash type of effect for the fan base.
Did you
remember like the stadium atmosphere at kickoff of Ohio State, like how that felt to like
for
be at that
59
event?
minutes? Yes, it was
crazy,
incredible. They were the center of the college football universe, and now they're not. And I said if I do 6-2 if they win. And again, you can't take anything for granted with the way they've played, but you come out of your bye week and you think we can make a New Year's Six game this year. And we probably should. I don't know if they will, but that's got to be your attitude.
Yeah, it would have to be your attitude. But just like what I said earlier, this team, I think, is entering like sort of this random result generator part of the season where I just don't know week to week, like whatever happens on Saturday, I don't know if that's going to prove anything or disprove anything. It's just going to be one team beat another team, and then Notre Dame is going to be one of those teams. They're going to have to pick up the pieces and do the same thing after its bye against Pittsburgh, and then against Clemson.
Can we predict, because this is a zany season already, independent of what happened Saturday, it would be like the chef's kiss of a weird season if Notre Dame loses a Pitt on a Phil Dracovic touchdown catch as a tight end.
That would be up there with Zach Frazier coming back to Notre Dame to beat the Charlie Weiss team of 2008, I think.
But Pat Narduzzi came out this week and said Phil Dracovic is not moving to tight end. He got asked if he was practicing there, and he said, I don't remember, which is Pat Narduzzi speak for, damn it, the secret got out. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. And we will absolutely see that man at tight end at some point this year, although they probably do need him as a backup quarterback too.
Yeah, sometime later this month in Notre Dame Stadium. But that's another subject for another podcast. On that note, we will wrap up this episode of The Independent there. Again, you can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your shows. We also have a YouTube stream. Subscribe, like, rate, review. All 5-star reviews help The Independent spread the word and get the show out to more listeners like yourselves. So we appreciate everybody who's been with us. He's Matt. I'm Pete. Thanks for being with us on the latest episode of The Independent.